A barefoot 11-year-old girl stood in the marble lobby of a Brentwood mansion, trembling. Charles Yass, billionaire, LA legend, a man who'd made grown investors weep, knelt before her. His face was wet with tears. "You didn't just open my vault," he whispered. "You opened something I've been unable to open for 10 years. Behind him, his son George stared at letters scattered across the floor, letters from a mother he thought had forgotten him. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood. Sometimes the richest people are the most broken, and sometimes the poorest carry gifts no money can buy. But to understand how a child brought a billionaire to his knees, we need to go back in 3 days, to the night everything shattered. But before we dive in, don't just watch, please hit the subscribe button. I'm still fighting my way to our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single click truly keeps this channel alive. And tell me in the comment where in the world you are watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience, healing, and kindness. East Los Angeles, Wednesday night, 9:47 p.m. Brenda Marquez was washing dishes in their studio apartment when she heard the crash. Her little brother Ryan had collapsed, his body seized on the linoleum floor, eyes rolling back, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. Their mother Maria dropped the laundry basket and screamed. Brenda didn't scream. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911, and held Ryan's head so he wouldn't choke. She was 11 years old, and this was the 4th time this month. The ambulance took 12 minutes. By the time they reached County General, Ryan's lips had turned blue. Doctors swarmed him like he was already slipping away. Maria collapsed into a plastic chair in the ER hallway, sobbing into her hands. She still wore her hotel uniform, the one she'd been wearing for a double shift when the call came. Brenda sat beside her mother, silent. She didn't cry. Not yet. Because crying meant accepting what the doctors were about to say. An hour later, Dr. Patel emerged from the ICU. His face said everything before his mouth did. "Mrs. Marquez, Ryan's condition has deteriorated significantly. There's an experimental treatment at Cedars-Sinai. It's his only real chance." Maria's voice cracked. "How much?" Dr. Patel hesitated. That hesitation told Brenda everything. $240,000. The procedure needs to happen within 72 hours, or his organs will start shutting down. Maria made a sound Brenda had never heard before, somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, like her soul was being pulled out through her chest. "We don't have that," Maria whispered. "We don't have anything close to that." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "I understand. We'll make Ryan as comfortable as possible. There are programs, but the waiting lists." "How long do those take?" Brenda asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Dr. Patel looked at her. "Weeks, sometimes months. Ryan has 3 days." "I know. I'm sorry." Brenda walked to the vending machines, while her mother spoke to social workers about payment plans that wouldn't matter. 2 nurses stood near the water fountain, voices low but not low enough. "That poor family," one said. "If only they had money. But people like that, they just don't." "The boy's sweet too. Shame." Brenda pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the vending machine. $240,000. They had $47 in their checking account, 3 months behind on rent. Maria worked 16-hour days cleaning hotel rooms in Century City, coming home smelling like bleach and other people's vacations. Brenda babysat on weekends for $8 an hour. They would never see $240,000 in their entire lives. Not in time. Not ever. Brenda returned to Ryan's room and stood at the foot of his bed. He looked so small under the white sheets, tubes running from his arms, monitors beeping steady rhythms that could stop any moment. She reached through the bed rail and held his hand. "I'm going to fix this," she whispered. Ryan didn't respond. Sedated, peaceful, unaware he was dying. Maria had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, exhausted from crying. Brenda stepped into the hallway and sat on the floor of the stairwell where no one could see her. And finally, she let herself cry. But only for 2 minutes, because somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory surfaced. Her grandfather, Abuelo Marquez, dead 5 years now. He used to fix locks in Mexico City. Not just fix them, understand them. People called him El Oidor, the listener. He would press his ear against a safe and hear things others couldn't. Vibrations, frequencies, metal speaking in a language only he understood. Before he died, he'd told Brenda, "You have it too, mija. The gift. I see it in the way you touch things." She'd never believed him. Until now. Brenda stood up, wiped her face, and walked back toward the waiting room. The television was on, and that's when she saw him. Charles Yass, the man who would change everything. The TV in the waiting room glowed against the fluorescent hospital lighting. A business news segment. Late night. The kind of show Brenda would never normally watch. But the name caught her attention. Charles Yass, LA's most mysterious billionaire. The reporter stood outside a massive Brentwood estate, gesturing toward iron gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress. Charles Yass built his fortune on real estate empires and tech investments, the reporter said. But it's what he keeps locked away that has people truly fascinated. The screen cut to archive footage. Charles Yass stepping out of a black Escalade. Late 50s, sharp suit, expression like carved granite. The kind of face that had crushed 1,000 business deals before breakfast. 3 years ago, the reporter continued, Yass installed what security experts call the most advanced personal vault in North America. 4,000 pounds of reinforced steel, digital and mechanical hybrid locks, biometric scanners. The segment showed blurry photos of the vault being installed, a massive steel door being lowered by crane into the mansion's underground level. Engineers from MIT tried to crack it. Failed. Former FBI consultants. Failed. 3 separate locksmith firms. All failed. Brenda leaned forward. And here's where it gets interesting, the reporter said with a slight smile. At a charity gala 2 years ago, Yass made an offhand comment that became LA legend. The screen showed grainy footage from the event. Charles holding a whiskey, surrounded by other wealthy donors. Someone had asked him about the vault. Charles had laughed a cold, dismissive sound. I'll give $70 million in bearer bonds to anyone who can open it, he'd said. But you'd have better luck finding snow in downtown LA in August. Everyone at the gala had laughed with him. A joke, billionaire humor, a flex. But Brenda didn't hear a joke. She heard a promise. She heard Ryan's only chance. Brenda pulled out her phone and searched everything she could find about Charles Yass. Real estate mogul, tech investor, net worth estimated at $3.2 billion. Known for ruthless business tactics, foreclosed on struggling companies, bought properties at bankruptcy auctions, made fortunes while others lost everything. No wife. She died 10 years ago. Cancer. 1 son. George Yass, 20 years old, Princeton dropout. Brenda clicked on an article from 8 months ago. George Yass publicly criticizes father. He values money over people. The article described a confrontation at a USC business conference where George had called his father emotionally bankrupt and said Charles cared more about his vault than his own family. They hadn't been photographed together since. Brenda kept scrolling. More articles about the vault. Security experts explaining why it was uncrackable. Theories about what was inside. Some said diamonds. Others claimed classified documents or blackmail material. One forum post caught her eye. My cousin worked on the vault installation, he said. Yass specifically designed it so no one could ever access it, not even him. Like he wanted to lock something away forever. Brenda sat back. The vault wasn't about protecting treasure. It was about protecting Charles from something he couldn't face. And suddenly, she understood. Her grandfather used to say, every lock tells a story. Most people only hear the click. But if you listen, really listen, you hear the fear that built it. Brenda looked back through the window into Ryan's room. Her mother still asleep in the chair. Ryan still hooked to machines keeping him alive. 72 hours. That's all they had. Brenda walked to the hospital elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. A nurse called after her. Honey, where are you going this late? To keep a promise, Brenda said. The doors closed. At 11:43 p.m., Brenda boarded the metro toward West LA. She'd never been to Brentwood before, never been west of La Cienega. She wore her school hoodie 3 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from a cousin. Her shoes had holes in the soles. She carried nothing but her phone and her grandfather's old lockpick set, wrapped in a cloth at the bottom of her backpack. The train was mostly empty. A few late-shift workers heading home, a man asleep against the window. Brenda clutched the photo of Ryan she'd saved on her phone, and she whispered the same thing her grandfather used to say. Before approaching an impossible lock, the metal will speak. I just have to listen. Sometimes we hear stories that shake us awake, stories that remind us how fragile everything is, how one moment can change whether someone lives or dies. If this story is doing that for you, if you feel what Brenda feels right now, maybe you're the kind of person who believes courage like hers Deserves to be seen. Brenda stepped off the bus at Sunset and Barrington at 1:14 a.m. Brentwood didn't look real. Mansions rose behind walls and hedges like monuments to a different species of human being. The streetlights glowed warmer here. Even the air smelled expensive jasmine and fresh-cut grass and wealth so thick you could choke on it. She walked 15 minutes uphill until she reached the address she'd found online. The Yass estate sat behind 10-foot iron gates, security cameras angled at every approach. The mansion beyond looked like something from a movie. 3 stories of white stone and floor-to-ceiling windows. Lights still on inside despite the hour. Brenda walked up to the call box beside the gate. Her finger hovered over the button. This was insane. She was an 11-year-old girl from East LA, about to ask a billionaire to honor a joke he'd made at a party 2 years ago. But Ryan had 69 hours left. She pressed the button. Static crackled. Then a voice, annoyed. "Yeah? I need to speak to Mr. Yass," Brenda said. Silence. Then laughter. Not from the intercom, from somewhere near the gate. 2 security guards appeared from a side booth, both grinning. "You need to speak to Mr. Yass," one repeated, mocking her tone. "Did you hear that, Tommy? Little girl needs to speak to Mr. Yass." "It's 1 in the morning, kid," the other guard said. "Go home before we call the cops." "He made a promise," Brenda said. "About the vault. I can open it." Both guards lost it. Full belly laughs, one of them doubling over. "The vault!" the first guard gasped. "Oh man. Tommy, she can open the vault. Kid, engineers from MIT couldn't crack that thing. Former CIA locksmiths, people with actual skills. What are you, 12? 11, Brenda said quietly. That made them laugh harder. "Go home," Tommy said, still chuckling. "Seriously, before you embarrass yourself more." But their laughter had carried. The mansion's front door opened. A man stepped out onto the curved driveway, Charles Yass. Even from 50 feet away, Brenda could feel his presence like gravity. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Dress shirt untucked, no shoes, a glass of something dark in his hand. "What the hell is going on out here?" he called. "Sorry, Mr. Yass," Tommy said. "Just some kid causing a disturbance. We're handling it." But Charles walked closer, curious now. He stopped 10 feet from the gate and looked at Brenda. Really looked. A tiny girl in an oversized hoodie, shoes with holes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes red from crying but steady. Determined. "Who are you?" Charles asked. "Brenda Marquez," she said. "You said anyone who opens your vault gets $70 million. My brother is dying. I need that money to save him. Please let me try." For 3 long seconds, Charles just stared. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, cruel sound that echoed off the mansion walls. "Are you serious right now?" Charles said, still laughing. "Do you have any idea how many actual professionals have tried? People with degrees, with decades of experience." "I know," Brenda said. "You're what? 10 years old?" 11. 11. Charles turned to his guards like they were sharing the joke of the century. "An 11-year-old from, where? East LA. Gonna crack a vault that beat MIT engineers." "My grandfather was a locksmith," Brenda said. "He taught me." "I don't care if your grandfather was Houdini." Charles cut her off. "Go. Home. You're embarrassing yourself." But then another voice joined the conversation. "Dad." A younger man appeared in the doorway of the mansion. George Yass, tall, thin, wearing sweatpants and a USC hoodie. His face carried the same bone structure as his father, but none of the hardness. He walked down the driveway toward them. "Dad, what's happening?" "Some kid thinks she can open the vault," Charles said, amused. "I'm sending her home before she wastes more of everyone's time." George looked at Brenda, then back at his father. "Let her try." Charles blinked. "What?" "Let her try," George repeated. "What are you afraid of? That she'll succeed where everyone else failed? That you'll actually have to give away some of that money you worship?" Charles's jaw tightened. "George, or is it that you're scared she might see what's actually inside?" George said, voice rising. "That someone might finally know what you've been hiding for 10 years. Father and son locked eyes. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Brenda held her breath. Finally, Charles turned back to her. "Fine," he said, voice like ice. "But when you fail, and you will fail, you're going to stand right here and admit on camera that poor people don't deserve what they can't earn. Deal?" The cruelty of it hit like a slap, but Brenda nodded. "And when I succeed," she said, "you save my brother." Charles smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Deal," he said. "Let's go watch you embarrass yourself." The gates opened. They descended into the mansion's lower level through a private elevator. Charles, George, Brenda, and 3 of Charles's board members who happened to be at the house for a late meeting. The elevator doors opened into a climate-controlled chamber that felt more like a bank vault than a basement. And there it was, the Yass Vault, 4,000 pounds of brushed steel set into reinforced concrete. The door was 6 inches thick, with a complex hybrid lock system, digital keypad, mechanical tumblers, and biometric scanner all integrated into one unit. It looked like something built to survive a nuclear blast. Brenda's heart hammered. "Well," Charles said, gesturing dramatically, "there's your impossible dream. Have at it." The board members stood behind him, already smirking. One of them had his phone out, recording. "This is going to be good," one whispered to another. "How long you think before she cries?" 5 minutes. "I give her 3. George stood apart from them, arms crossed, watching his father with disgust. Brenda approached the vault. She slipped off her shoes, the guards exchanged confused glances and placed her bare feet on the concrete floor. Her grandfather had taught her. Vibrations travel better through bare skin. She pressed her palms against the cold steel door and closed her eyes. "What's she doing?" one board member whispered. "Praying, probably," another said. Laughter. But Brenda wasn't praying. She was listening. Not with her ears, with something deeper. The metal hummed against her skin, frequencies most people would never notice. The vault wasn't silent. Nothing was ever truly silent. Everything vibrated. Everything spoke. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Metal remembers, Miha. Every lock remembers the hands that built it, the fear that sealed it. Listen for the heartbeat underneath the mechanism." Brenda's breathing slowed. Her fingers traced the edge of the keypad, feeling microscopic imperfections in the surface, places where fingers had pressed more often. Worn patterns invisible to the eye but clear to touch. Charles checked his Rolex. "It's been 2 minutes. Want to give up now and save yourself the humiliation?" Brenda didn't respond. She moved to the mechanical dial on the right side of the door. Old-school tumbler system integrated with modern tech, Charles's paranoia made manifest. She placed her ear against the steel and began to turn the dial, slowly, so slowly it looked like she wasn't moving at all. Click. A sound so faint the board members couldn't hear it. But Brenda could. She continued turning, listening, feeling the vibrations through the metal into her skull. Click, click. "This is ridiculous," one of the board members said. "Charles, come on. It's almost 2 in the morning." "Let her finish," George said quietly. "You gave your word." Charles shot his son a look but said nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Brenda's world narrowed to the vault, and the voice of the metal and the memory of her grandfather's hands guiding hers when she was 6 years old, showing her how to feel a lock's secrets. 15 minutes. Charles yawned loudly, theatrically. "I'll give you 70 million if you open that vault. You've got a better chance of finding a snowman in downtown LA. The board members chuckled. But Brenda's eyes snapped open. She turned to face Charles. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Mr. Yass, your vault isn't protecting money." Charles froze. "It's protecting you from something you can't face." The room went silent. "How?" Charles started. But Brenda had already turned back to the vault. Her fingers moved across the keypad now, pressing numbers in a sequence that made no logical sense, but felt right in a way she couldn't explain. She whispered, "I'm sorry you couldn't save her." Charles's face went white. "What did you just—" Clank. The sound was deafening in the small chamber. Metal grinding against metal. Hydraulics engaging. Locks disengaging. The vault door's seal broke with a hiss of pressurized air. Slowly, impossibly, the door began to swing open. One of the board members dropped his phone. George's mouth fell open. The guards who'd followed them down took a step back, and Charles Yass, billionaire, LA legend, the man who'd crushed empires, staggered backward like he'd been shot. "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible." But Brenda had done it. She'd opened the uncrackable vault, and what was inside was about to change everything. Everyone rushed forward. The board members, the guards, George, all of them expecting diamonds, gold bars, classified documents, blackmail material, something worth protecting with 4,000 pounds of steel. But the vault held none of that. Instead, stacked neatly on metal shelves, were boxes. Dozens of boxes. Cardboard. Simple. Old. And inside the boxes, letters. Hundreds of letters tied with ribbon. Charles stood frozen in the doorway, his face drained of all color. George reached the vault first. He pulled out the nearest box and opened it. Letters. All in the same handwriting. Elegant. Flowing. Feminine. He pulled one out, hands shaking as he read the envelope. To George, for your 10th birthday. Love, Mom. George's breath caught. Another envelope. To George, age 18. When you graduate. Another. To George, age 25. Your first heartbreak. To George, age 40. When you become a father. To George, age 65. When you retire. To George, age 80. When you look back. Letters for every milestone, every year, every moment of a life his mother would never see. George's hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped the box. What is this? He whispered. One of the board members pulled out another box. More letters, all addressed to George, all in Margaret Yass's handwriting, all written before she died. When George was 9 years old, she knew, George said, voice breaking. She knew she was dying, and she wrote me letters for my entire life. He looked at his father. Charles still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He stared at the open vault like it was a wound that had just been reopened. You've had these for 10 years, George said. 10 years, and you never gave them to me? I couldn't, Charles whispered. You couldn't, George's voice rose. I grew up thinking Mum forgot about me, that she didn't care enough to leave me anything. And the whole time you had hundreds of letters from her locked in here. George, I spent a decade hating her, George shouted, thinking she chose to die without saying goodbye. And you let me believe that. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. George threw the box, letters scattered across the floor. You couldn't face the fact that you failed to save her, so you locked away every reminder. You didn't care what that did to me. Charles flinched like he'd been struck. The board members backed toward the elevator, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. But Brenda stepped forward. She knelt and picked up one of the scattered letters, opened it carefully. The handwriting was beautiful, shaky in places, written by someone weak, dying, but determined. Brenda read aloud. My dearest George, you're 10 years old today. I wish I could be there to see you blow out your candles. I wish I could watch you grow into the man I know you'll become. But since I can't, I want you to know something. Your father loves you more than anything in this world. He may not know how to show it. He may bury himself in work and money and things that don't matter, but when I'm gone, he's going to be lost. Be patient with him, my love. He's not cruel, he's just broken. And broken people sometimes lock away the things that hurt them most, not because they don't care, but because they care too much. Happy birthday, my beautiful boy. All my love, Mum. Brenda's voice cracked on the last line. The room was silent except for George's ragged breathing. Charles stood with tears streaming down his face, the first tears anyone in that room had ever seen from him. Every letter, Charles said quietly, reminded me that I failed her. The doctors said there was a treatment, experimental, expensive. I had the money. I had all the money. But I hesitated. I wanted a second opinion. I wanted to be sure. His voice broke. I waited 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks the cancer spread. By the time I said yes, it was too late. George's anger faltered. She spent her last months writing those letters, Charles continued. Hundreds of them. She made me promise to give them to you when you were ready. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at them, all I saw was my failure. The 3 weeks I stole from her, the choice that killed her. So you locked them away, Brenda said softly. Charles looked at her. This tiny girl in a too-big hoodie, who had somehow cracked not just his vault, but his carefully constructed defenses. How did you know? He asked. My grandfather told me, Brenda said. The hardest locks aren't built to keep people out. They're built to keep pain in. Charles sank to his knees. George stood over him, still holding a letter, tears running down his own face now. Dad, George's voice was barely a whisper. And then something broke between them. 10 years of distance, of hurt, of walls built so high neither knew how to climb them. George knelt beside his father, and for the first time in a decade, they held each other. 2 broken men surrounded by letters from a woman who'd known they'd need her words to find their way back to each other. Brenda stepped back, giving them space. But Charles reached out and caught her hand. Your brother, he said, voice hoarse from crying. Tell me everything. There are moments that remind us why stories matter, why we tell them, why we listen. Because sometimes a stranger's pain becomes a mirror, and we see our own chances to choose differently. If you feel that right now, if this is touching something in you that matters, then maybe you're part of why stories like this need to exist. Brenda told him everything. Ryan's collapse, the seizures that came without warning, the diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence, the experimental treatment at Cedars-Sinai that cost more money than her family would see in 3 lifetimes, the 72-hour deadline that was now down to 66 hours. Charles listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood up. The man who'd been on his knees crying 30 seconds ago transformed back into the billionaire who'd built empires. "George," he said, his voice sharp with command, "get your keys. We're taking the Range Rover." George wiped his eyes. "Where?" "Cedars-Sinai, now." Charles pulled out his phone and started dialing as he headed for the elevator. "Dr. Reeves?" "Charles, yes. I don't care what time it is. I need you to get to Cedars-Sinai immediately." "Yes, tonight. There's a child named Ryan Marquez in the ICU. He needs the experimental neurological treatment. I don't care about protocols. I'll cover all costs, full authorization, everything." "Good. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and made another call. "Sharma?" "Yes. I need you to contact the hospital administrator at Cedars. Tell them to prep their surgical team. Money is not a factor. This is happening tonight." Brenda stood in the vault room, surrounded by scattered letters, barely able to process what was happening. Charles turned to her. "Come on. Every second we waste is a second your brother doesn't have." The Range Rover tore through empty LA streets at 2:47 a.m. George drove. Charles sat in the passenger seat, still making calls. Brenda was in the back, gripping her seatbelt like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned completely upside down. "Dr. Chen, I need you at Cedars within the hour. I understand you're in San Francisco. Charter a helicopter. Bill me directly. Thank you." Another call. "Get me legal. I need full medical power of attorney documents drawn up for Maria Marquez." "Yes, now. Have them ready by the time we arrive at the hospital." George glanced at his father. "You're really doing this? What did you think I was going to do?" Charles said. "I don't know. I stopped trying to predict you 10 years ago." Charles was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's last letter to me," he said softly, "said that I'd spend the rest of my life trying to save people I couldn't save, that I'd turn into someone who counted money instead of moments." He looked out the window at the city passing by. "She was right. But tonight I get to prove she was also wrong about who I could become." George's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he almost smiled. They arrived at Cedars-Sinai at 3:18 a.m. Brenda barely remembered running through the lobby, Charles striding ahead like he owned the building. Nurses and administrators appearing out of nowhere, suddenly mobilized. They found Maria in Ryan's room, asleep in the chair beside her son's bed. Brenda touched her mother's shoulder. Maria jolted awake, confused, terrified. "Mija, where did you—" Then she saw Charles Yass standing in the doorway. "Mrs. Marquez," Charles said gently. "My name is Charles Yass. Your daughter opened something for me tonight that I thought was impossible, so now I'm going to do something for you that feels impossible." He gestured to the team of doctors filing into the hallway outside. "These are the best pediatric specialists in California. They're going to save your son's life, tonight, and it won't cost you a single dollar." Maria stared at him, then at Brenda, then back at the doctors. I don't understand." "You don't have to understand," Charles said. "You just have to let us help." Dr. Reeves stepped forward, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the calm authority of someone who'd performed miracles before. "Mrs. Marquez, we're going to take Ryan into surgery within the hour. The procedure is delicate, but we have every reason to believe it will work." Maria's voice shook. "What are his chances?" Dr. Reeves hesitated. That hesitation said everything. 50-50, she admitted. "The treatment is experimental, but without it, he has no chance at all." Maria looked at Ryan, still unconscious, still hooked to machines. Then she looked at Brenda, her 11-year-old daughter who had somehow pulled off a miracle in the middle of the night. "Do it," Maria whispered. "Save my son." They prepped Ryan for surgery at 4:02 a.m. Brenda watched through the window as nurses moved around her brother's bed, checking vitals, inserting new lines, preparing him for the fight of his life. George stood beside her. "He's going to make it," George said. You don't know that. No, but I choose to believe it anyway. Brenda looked up at him. Why? George smiled sadly. Because 3 hours ago, I thought my mother forgot about me. I thought my father was incapable of love. I thought some things were too broken to fix. He nodded toward the operating room. Your brother taught me something tonight. So did you. Sometimes the impossible just needs someone brave enough to try. At 4:47 a.m., they wheeled Ryan toward surgery. Maria walked beside the gurney, holding his hand until they reached the doors she couldn't pass through. Dr. Reeves turned to them. This will take 6 to 8 hours. We'll update you every 90 minutes. The surgical doors closed, and all they could do was wait. The surgical waiting room at Cedars-Sinai was nothing like County General. Comfortable chairs, warm lighting, coffee that didn't taste like burnt regret. But comfort didn't matter when someone you loved was fighting for their life 3 floors below. Brenda sat beside her mother. Maria held rosary beads, lips moving in silent prayer. Charles and George sat across from them. For a long time, no one spoke. Then George pulled out his phone. He'd taken photos of some of his mother's letters before they left the mansion. Can I read one? He asked his father. Charles nodded, not trusting his voice. George opened the first letter, the one marked for his 10th birthday. He read it aloud. His mother's words filled the waiting room. Memories of a woman who knew she was dying but refused to let death steal her love. Advice for a boy she'd never see grow up. Hopes for the man he'd become. By the end, everyone was crying. Even Charles. She knew exactly who you'd be, Charles said quietly. She saw it before I did. She saw you too, George said. Listen to this part. He read from another letter. Your father is the strongest man I know, but strength can be a prison if you use it to keep people out instead of holding them close. When I'm gone, he's going to build walls. Please, George. Climb them. Don't let him push you away. Charles covered his face with his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, George, I'm so sorry. I know. I wasted 10 years. Then let's not waste any more. Father and son sat in silence for a moment. Then George moved to sit beside Charles. And Charles put his arm around his son for the first time in a decade. Maria watched them with tears streaming down her face. You have a beautiful gift, Mija, she said to Brenda. But it's not just opening locks. It's opening hearts. Brenda leaned against her mother. I was so scared, she admitted. When I went to that mansion, I thought he'd call the police. I thought I'd fail and Ryan would die, and it would be my fault for wasting time. But you didn't fail. I got lucky. No, Charles said, looking at her. Luck is random. What you did was skill, your grandfather's gift, but also your courage. He leaned forward. Brenda, I've met thousands of people in my life. Businessmen, politicians, investors, people with credentials and experience, and every advantage. He paused, and an 11-year-old girl showed more courage in one night than most of them have shown in their entire lives. I just wanted to save my brother. Exactly, Charles said. Love made you brave. That's the rarest gift of all. At 7:15 a.m., Dr. Reeves emerged for the first update. Everyone stood immediately. The procedure is progressing as expected, she said. Ryan's vitals are stable. No complications so far. We're about halfway through. It was good news, but only halfway meant another 3 hours of not knowing. George ordered breakfast from the hospital cafeteria. Maria couldn't eat. Brenda forced down half a muffin. Charles drank coffee like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Tell me about your grandfather, Charles said to Brenda. So she did. She told them about El Oidor, about watching him work in Mexico City when she was little, about the way he'd close his eyes and place his ear against a safe and somehow hear the metal's secrets. People thought it was magic, Brenda said, but he told me it wasn't. He said everything vibrates, everything makes sound. Most people just don't know how to listen. He sounds like he was a remarkable man, George said. He was. He died when I was 6. I didn't realize I had his gift until tonight. What made you realize? Charles asked. Brenda thought about it. Desperation, she said finally, when Ryan collapsed and the doctors said there was no way. I think something woke up in me, like my grandfather was there, reminding me I could do impossible things if I had a good enough reason. Maria squeezed her daughter's hand. He would be so proud of you, Mija. At 10:03 a.m., Dr. Reeves returned. Her face was unreadable. Everyone stood. No one breathed. There were complications, Dr. Reeves said. Maria gasped. But we managed them, Dr. Reeves continued quickly. Ryan's response to the treatment has been, honestly, it's been extraordinary, better than we hoped. Is he? Brenda couldn't finish. Dr. Reeves smiled, a real smile. He's going to make it. The surgery was successful. He'll need weeks of recovery and follow-up treatments. But yes, Ryan is going to live. Maria collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Brenda felt her legs give out. George caught her before she hit the floor. Charles turned away, but not before everyone saw the tears. Can we see him? Maria asked. He's in recovery now. He'll be unconscious for a few more hours. But yes, soon. Dr. Reeves looked at Charles. Mr. Yass, what you did tonight. You saved this boy's life. Charles shook his head. No, he said, looking at Brenda. She did. I just finally learned how to help. They let Brenda see Ryan first. He was in a private recovery room, the kind Maria could never have afforded. Machines beeped steadily. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that looked like peace. Brenda took his hand. You're going to be okay, she whispered. We did it. Ryan's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, he opened his eyes. Confused, groggy, but alive. Brenda? His voice was barely audible. I'm here. What happened? You got the treatment. The doctors fixed you. Ryan blinked slowly, processing. How? Mom said we couldn't afford it. I found a way. How? Brenda smiled through tears. I'll explain later. Right now you just need to rest. Did you do something dangerous? Maybe a little. Ryan squeezed her hand weakly. You're the best sister ever, and you're the best brother. Maria entered then, followed by nurses who needed to check Ryan's vitals. Brenda stepped back, giving her mother space to hold her son. In the hallway, Charles waited. He's awake, Brenda said. That's wonderful. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Charles said, I made you a promise. $70 million. The bearer bonds are in a safety deposit box downtown. I'll have them transferred to your name this afternoon. Brenda looked at him. I don't want them. Charles blinked. What? I don't want the money, Mr. Yass. I just wanted Ryan to live. But we had a deal. You already kept your deal. You saved my brother. That's all I needed. Charles stared at this 11-year-old girl who'd just turned down $70 million. You're serious? Yes. Brenda, do you understand what that money could do for your family? Your mother would never have to work double shifts again. You could go to any college you wanted. You could... We'll be okay, Brenda said. We always have been. Ryan's alive. That's enough. George had been standing nearby, listening. Dad, he said quietly, she just taught you something you spent 60 years not learning. Charles looked at his son, then back at Brenda. What did I just learn? That some things can't be bought, George said. That the people with the least sometimes understand wealth better than people with billions. Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt down so he was eye level with Brenda. You've earned far more than money tonight, he said. You've earned something I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give you. What's that? A family that will stand with you forever. Later that afternoon, Charles gathered the hospital's administrators. I'm establishing a foundation, he announced. The Marquez Yass Foundation. Its sole purpose will be funding medical care for children whose families can't afford treatment. He looked at George. My son will run it. And it starts with $100 million endowment. The administrators looked stunned. George looked at his father with something that might have been pride. I want the first facility built in East LA, Charles continued, where families like the Marquezes don't have to watch their children die because of numbers in a bank account. He turned to Brenda. And I want you to be there when we open it, you and Ryan, because this foundation exists because of what you did tonight. I didn't do anything special, Brenda said. Yes, you did, Charles said. You reminded a broken man what matters. And that's worth more than any vault I could ever build. 3 days later, Ryan was moved out of ICU. The doctors said his recovery was remarkable. Ahead of schedule, Charles visited every day, sometimes with George, sometimes alone. He'd sit with Maria and Brenda and just talk about life, about loss, about second chances. You know what's strange? Charles said one afternoon. I spent 30 years building walls, around my heart, around my pain, around everything I was afraid to feel. He smiled at Brenda. And an 11-year-old girl knocked them all down in one night. I just listened, Brenda said. No, Charles said. You cared enough to try. That's different. On Ryan's 8th day in the hospital, they prepared for his discharge. He could walk now, slowly, with help. But he could walk. The doctors called it a miracle. Brenda called it a promise kept. As they packed Ryan's things, Charles pulled Brenda aside. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check, not for 70 million, for 200,000. "That's what the treatment cost," Charles said. "The deal was I'd save your brother. But the 70 million was for opening the vault. You earned both, Mr. Yass. It's already done. The money's in a trust for your education, yours and Ryan's. You can't refuse it because it's not technically yours until you turn 18. Brenda looked at the check, then at Charles. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Charles said. "Thank you." 3 months later, the Marquez Yass Foundation opened its doors in a renovated building on Cesar Chavez Avenue in East LA. Local news covered the ceremony. National media picked up the story. The girl who cracked the uncrackable vault. The billionaire who found his humanity. Reporters crowded around Brenda on opening day. "How did you do it?" one asked. "How did you open a safe that defeated engineers from MIT? Brenda thought about her answer carefully. "The hardest locks don't need force," she said. "They need someone willing to listen." The reporters scribbled notes, not really understanding. But Charles understood. He stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "She taught me that night," Charles said to the cameras, "that I'd been locked in a prison of my own making. That I'd confused protecting myself with protecting what mattered." George stood on Charles's other side, father and son, together. For the first time in years, they looked like family. "This foundation exists because a child was brave enough to ask for help," George said, "and because my father was finally brave enough to give it." The foundation's first year saved 43 children. Kids like Ryan, families like the Marquezes, people who'd been given death sentences because their bank accounts couldn't match their medical bills. Charles funded it all personally. Every procedure, every treatment, every hope that became a life saved. He'd found something he'd been missing for a decade. Purpose. Brenda visited the foundation every Saturday. She volunteered in the family waiting room, talking to scared parents who reminded her of her mother that terrible night. "It's going to be okay," she'd tell them. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but sometimes miracles happen." And they did. Week after week, child after child, the foundation became proof that money could be used for something bigger than vaults and empires. On the 1-year anniversary, Charles held a private ceremony, just family, his and the Marquezes. They stood in the mansion's lower level, in front of the vault that had started everything. The door remained open now, always open. Inside, Margaret's letters were displayed in glass cases, not hidden, not locked away. A memorial to love that outlasted death. George visited often, reading letters his mother had written for the years he'd already lived and the years still to come. Charles read them too, finally facing the grief he'd been running from for 10 years. "Your mother was right," Charles said to George that day. "I did become someone who counted money instead of moments." He looked at Brenda. "But your daughter changed that." Maria smiled, her arm around Brenda. "She changed all of us." Ryan stood beside his sister, healthy now, strong, alive, a walking reminder that impossible things happen when someone cares enough to try. Charles knelt in front of the vault one last time. He placed his hand on the cold steel door. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the vault, but to his wife. To Margaret, who'd known he'd need someone to break him open before he could finally heal. And to an 11-year-old girl who'd listened when no one else could hear. Brenda touched the vault's door beside him. The metal hummed under her fingers. But this time, it didn't sound like fear locked away. It sounded like freedom finally found. She thought of her grandfather, El Oidor, the man who'd given her this gift. "We did it, abuelo," she whispered. "We saved more than one life." Outside, the California sun set over Los Angeles. Somewhere in the city, another family faced an impossible choice. Another child needed a miracle. And in an East LA building with the Marquez Yass Foundation sign above the door, that miracle was waiting. Because sometimes the richest people are the most broken, and sometimes the poorest carry gifts no money can buy. And sometimes, all it takes is someone brave enough to listen. Stories like this one don't just entertain. They remind us who we could be if we chose courage over comfort. If you felt something real watching Brenda's journey, don't scroll past, like this video, share these videos to your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel. because tomorrow I am sharing an amazing story, just like this.